probably second in importance to just displaying HTML documents. The second most important part of websites is going to be web forms, or the ability to gather information from the users that visit our website. We see this all the time as we visit websites, whether it's visiting Amazon.com when we're going through the checkout process and we need to enter in our name, our email address to create an account, and then we have to enter in our address and our payment information. All of these systems use HTML forms to gather that information from the user. Just like Amazon, Neumont.edu, if we go to the request information page, we find an HTML form. And in this form, we have the ability to enter in our personal information in order to get information from Neumont regarding all of the degrees that Neumont offers. And so long as you enter in all the required information, you should be able to submit the form. And when this happens, we are actually sending the information to the back-end web server that is running the web application. And that data that we have provided in the form is then manipulated, or it is stored, or it is sent to an API for storage or distribution, or there's a billion different things you can do with the information that comes in from a website through a web form. But those are the most common use cases when it comes to submitting information through a web form. So let's talk about how we actually build a web form like this one here on Neumont EDU. We're going to go back to our project that we have been slowly building. I'm going to go ahead and start it up in my preview server. And this will give us right here, we now have our page up and running. We're going to be working on the Contact Us page that we have been slowly building over the process of this tutorial on HTML. So in our Contact Us page, we have a table that shows the people that we can contact. But most websites, in conjunction to providing contact information like phone numbers and email addresses, they usually have a contact form that is very similar to what we see on Neumont's website. A form where you can put in your name, your email address, and your phone number, and then submit it in order to have somebody at that company or the owners of the website can contact you back and provide you with some additional information. So we're going to go ahead and create that form right now in HTML so that on this page we then have a form, an HTML form, where somebody could submit a question. So let's start off by adding ourselves a new section in our Contact Us. So we'll add another section. And in this section, we're going to go ahead and create a form. And as we build the form, we'll talk about the various aspects of an HTML form. So as expected, the HTML tag for a form is simply form. And let me scroll that up a little bit. So form. With a form, we can choose to add an action right here. And what an action does for us is the action provides a URI of a program that processes the information. The value can be overridden by other things on the input button or the button element as an attribute. But really that's all action does, is it provides a URI for the program that's going to process the information. And then the method is going to be the HTTP method that we want the form to use when it posts back to the URL provided in action. So a lot of times you're going to end up with a post. So let's be a little bit more specific on action. So action is the URI. So HTTP S, because we want all of our information to go over the secured socket layer, right? So HTTPS, and then whatever our website is, let's say that it is www.myawesomeprofile.com, and then our slash, and then this would be the file path, or the path to the application page that is going to end up accepting the post and processing that data So this is going to be on your web server most likely a controller if you're using an MVC model application, and you'll learn about that later if that doesn't make any sense. But it is going to be a controller method that would accept an HTTP post, and then it would look for the data from your form. So let's say it's going to be more info request. So we have an actual URL to which the data from our form is going to be sent, and we are going to use an HTTP post to make that happen. And then of course you can add a class with some style. So maybe you have a request info style that you're going to use for all of your form, or for this particular form. And that provides you right there the parent element form. Now inside of the parent element, this is where we begin to add our inputs. Now the really cool thing about HTML, especially with HTML5 and all of the additional elements that were added to it, is that we can add inputs that are specific to types of data, and then have those inputs help us out when it comes to receiving that information or that data from that web form. So let's start off with, for this contact us or this request more information form, we're going to go ahead and we're going to need to have them enter their name so we know who it is we're talking to, and we can use their name in our reply. So we're going to use a label, and a label is used to provide the text that's associated with an input or text box that we have in our form. And in order to associate it with the appropriate input, we're going to go ahead and use the for attribute, and then the name of the input that it belongs to. And you'll understand what I mean by that when I say the name for the name of the input. So enter your name, and then we need to give ourselves an input. And we want to make sure that it is a text type input, because all we're doing is getting text. And there are a bunch of different input types, and we'll look at a few of those in the form as we build it. You can also go to the Mozilla Documentation for a form. Let's go ahead and put that up here really quick so you guys can see it. So you can go to this URL and you can actually see all the different input types that there are for an HTML input. And you just need to click on input on that page. In the left-hand column, there's a link for input. And then you can see all the different ones. Okay. So we've got ourselves the text type for our input. Now here's where I was talking about name. So we want to make sure that each input is uniquely labeled so we know what data is contained in it. And that's what this name attribute is for. And here you can see I'm using for the name of this input, because I'm having somebody enter their name. I used name as the name of the input. Now that's totally confusing, so let's clear this up, and let's say full name. And I can say full name. Now you can see that the name of this particular input is full name. So when my form posts back to this action URL, I will have a key value pair, and the key is going to be full name, and then the value of the input, whatever the user typed in, is going to be the value in that key value pair. So full name will be the key. Now because it's the key, you can see that this label with this key relates to this particular input. And we're going to see that on the other inputs that we also add. So we've got a name. You may want to give it an ID as well, since it should be unique on the page, and we're going to give it full name as the name. And then I'm going to specify it as a required field, and then go ahead and close that input off. Now, we're going to want an email address, so let's do another label. And we're going to use for, and it is going to be email address. And then let's go ahead and ask them for their email. And then let's add an input that will capture the email. So we're going to do type, and we're going to choose email for the type. And we're going to give it the same name, so it's going to be email-address. And then we'll give it an ID. Oops. And then we're going to give it the same thing, email-address. And then we want this one to be required as well. And then the last one, maybe we'll want a phone number, so let's do label for, we're going to do phone. So we're going to add an input for our phone, and for our type, we're going to go with text, and that is because phone numbers in various countries are different, so there is not a default for phone as an input type. So we'll just have to use JavaScript. We would have to use JavaScript in order to make sure that we verified that the phone number entered was a correct phone number pattern using regular expressions, but we're not going to get into that right now. So phone number, let's say it's not required. Really, all we really want is at least an email address for that. And then for the rest of our form, now that we've got all of our basic inputs, we're going to want at least for the user to be able to put in some information about what they need help with or why they're contacting us. So let's go ahead and put in a comments field. So we'll do a label for comments. Comments/questions is what we'll call it in the text. And then we are going to do a bigger amount of text, or we want to allow them to have more text than a regular input would provide. So we're going to go ahead and use a text area for this, and we're going to give it the name of comments, because that's what we called the label, and that's what the label is referring to. Same with the ID, we're going to say comments. And then we need, for a text area, we need to specify the rows. And we're going to do 5 rows. And the columns is pretty much the number of characters horizontally that it can go. And we will do 33. And that provides us with a text area. And then let's see what it looks like right now. Now that we've got all of that put together, let's go to our browser and look at it. All right, so we've got ourselves a place to put our name, an email, a phone, and question or comments. They're all going horizontally, and that is because we're not using any styles. We're not really blocking anything or dividing it up. In most forms, you're going to do something in order to provide styling for it. So you might wrap these in a div and then give it a class called input fields or something like that. And then that div would then wrap each set of input fields, something like this. And then you would have CSS styles that would then help with that. So we can go ahead and do this to all of our input field groups. And then make sure we get our closing divs on there. Closing div after this one. And then closing div right here. And then let's tab each of our HTML elements in so that we've got a nice hierarchy to show. Oops, I shouldn't have put that div in. We just want the input and the labels. And look, I made a mistake right there. I put my div before my text area tag, which would have caused us problems because my div would have broken that text area. All right, so now we've separated them. Now they're not going horizontal, they're going more vertical. Again, when we get to CSS, we'll be able to style a form and actually make this look a lot better. Right now, it's better than it going horizontal because now it's going vertical. So That does help a bit. And now we can see that we can enter in our name, we can enter in our email, we can enter in a phone, 1, 2, 3, and then we can add some comments. Looks like I forgot the last part of that. All right, so now we're missing a submit. We need a submit button if we really want this form to be able to be submitted to our action URL up there. So let's go ahead and let's add another input fields div. And then in here, we're going to create a new input and we're going to do type. And this time we're doing submit. This tells the form that we are going to be providing a submit button for the form. And when this button gets clicked, it will actually cause the post method to be executed by the form to this particular action URL, and all of the data that we have here will be placed in key value pairs, with the key being the name of the input field, and then the text that was written by the user into that field will be the value of that key value pair. And the key value pairs all together become a dictionary, and that dictionary is then sent to this URL as part of an HTTP post. And then this URL, whatever is sitting behind it, that application, will need to pull out that dictionary and then pull out each of these values and then do whatever it's going to do with them. Now the value on the submit button is the text that appears in the button. So we're going to go ahead and say submit. And then we'll go ahead and close that as well. And if we go back to our HTML, we should now have a submit button. So if we enter in our information, clark@neumont.edu, phone, and then I would like to know more. We have learned about HTML forms. We've learned about the form and its attributes, where we have action, which is the URL to which we want the data sent. We have the method, which is the HTTP method that we would like used as we communicate with the action URL. And then we learned about input fields and fields of different types, and where we can go to find out more about forms, as well as the elements or the input types that can be used within forms, as well as how to set up an input type to be our submit button that will cause the form to post its data to the action URL. We also learned that all of the data that gets submitted in a form ends up becoming key value pairs, with the key being the name of the input element, and then the value being whatever is typed in by the user into that input field in the form. All of those key value pairs together become a dictionary, and that dictionary is then sent to the action URL using the HTTP method, in this case, an HTTP post.